My name is Aglaia Orlova, and at 29, I never expected to find myself in the middle of a real family war. It all started when my beloved grandmother, Elizaveta Matveyevna, passed away last month after a long illness. My father, Roman, her youngest son, was something of a rebel in our family, becoming a university literature professor rather than a businessman. He and my mother, Svetlana, a nurse, raised me to value helping others more than wealth. Every Sunday, we visited my grandmother's huge apartment in an old house on Arbat, filled with antiques, a real family heirloom. But everything changed when I was 13. My father died suddenly of an aneurysm, and then Elizaveta Matveyevna, who became my second mother, decisively intervened. For the next 6 years, I lived between my mother's modest apartment, where she worked 2 shifts, and my grandmother's spacious rooms. "You're like me, Aglaia," she would say as we sat in her winter garden. "You see people for who they are, not what they can give you." Those words shaped me more than she could have imagined. Elizaveta Matveyevna was not your typical rich widow. She wore simple clothes, quietly donated to charity, and believed that her apartment was a home filled with memories, not ostentatious wealth. My Uncle Pavel and his wife, Aunt Lydia, never understood her choice. Living in a luxurious mansion in the Moscow region, they constantly pressured my grandmother to live up to her status. When I decided to follow in my mother's footsteps and become a nurse in the paleo department, my relatives were perplexed. "You could work in the family business, Aglaia." Uncle Pavel cornered me at one of our New Year's dinners, twirling a glass of expensive cognac in his hands. "Why waste time on a career with such a low ceiling? One call to your grandmother and you'll be set for life." I just smiled and said, "I want to achieve everything myself, Uncle Pavel." My cousins, Rodion and Raisa, graduates of prestigious business schools, found my choice incomprehensible. "But don't you want to be rich?" Raisa once asked me quite seriously. The idea that I could value anything other than money was foreign to them. When my grandmother's health began to deteriorate, I began visiting her twice a week, helping with groceries, medicine, and just sitting by her side. Together, we baked her favorite Tula gingerbread, the secret ingredient of which, a pinch of black pepper, was known only to me. During these visits, she told me the story of our family, which no one else cared about, how her own grandmother had been one of the first female doctors in St. Petersburg. "Remember, Aglaia," she once told me, "poor wealth makes a man worthy, and the way he treats others when he thinks he will get nothing in return is the true measure of character." Meanwhile, the rest of her relatives visited her only occasionally and superficially. The first major break had occurred 3 years ago, when my grandmother was 86. Uncle Pavel called a family council, to which he brought a real estate agent. "We are discussing the sale of the dacha," he announced, referring to our family home on the Volga, under the backwater. "It is empty, and the maintenance costs are ridiculous." I glanced at Grandma and saw her lips tighten. "Has Grandma agreed to this?" I asked. Uncle Pavel waved his hand dismissively. "Mother understands that this is a practical solution." Actually, it was me who intervened. We had just talked last week about her wanting to spend a few weeks there this summer. There was silence in the room. Finally, Grandma spoke firmly. "I really told Aglaia that. I'm not going to sell my dacha." The agent awkwardly walked away. As soon as he left, Uncle Pavel pounced on me. "You always do this, thinking you know better than anyone, but you don't understand financial considerations." "What I do understand," I answered evenly, "is that Grandma should make her own decisions about her property." That evening, after everyone had left, Uncle Pavel ambushed me in the kitchen. "Listen carefully," he said in a low, menacing voice. "You may think you're special to her, but you're tempting fate. Don't forget who created this family's wealth, and it certainly wasn't your father." The jab at my father hurt, but I stood firm. "It's not about the money, Uncle Pavel. It's about respecting your grandmother's wishes." From that day on, Uncle Pavel began what I can only describe as a targeted campaign against me. Uncle Pavel's campaign against me began quietly, but methodically. At first, it was subtle, poisonous hints to other family members about how I was manipulating my grandmother, the suggestion that I was trying to get myself a special place in the will. One day, I accidentally overheard Aunt Lydia talking on the phone to someone from distant relatives, and Glea took her completely into her hands. The old man is trusting. By the following New Year, it was clear that many of them were already against me. At a holiday dinner, Aunt Lydia, deliberately conducting a loud photo setup, accidentally excluded me from the frame, and Raisa, looking directly at me, loudly discussed the fortune hunters who flock to the elderly and lonely. I tried to dispel these suspicions directly, sending emails to my aunts and uncles, explaining that I wasn't interested in Grandma's money. I just wanted her last years to be comfortable and on her terms. The responses were, at best, cool. Aunt Lydia's answer was short and sharp. We all want the best for Mother, dear, and the rest didn't respond at all. The following Easter, the family gathered at Uncle Pavel's mansion. I was not invited, of course. I found out about it from social networks, when Raisa posted a whole series of photos with the caption, "How wonderful it is to spend the bright holiday with real family." In one of the photos, Grandma was sitting in a corner, in an unfamiliar chair, and looked weak and completely lost. My heart sank with pain, and I called her that evening. "Did you enjoy the Easter dinner?" I asked cautiously. "It was fine," she replied, then lowered her voice, "but the Easter cakes were not the kind I like, and it is always too cold in Pavel's house," and I shivered. "I wish I had been there. I would have brought you a shawl," I said. There was a pause. "You weren't invited." The genuine surprise in her voice confirmed my worst suspicion. She hadn't even been told I'd been excluded. As my grandmother's health deteriorated, the family began actively and openly restricting my access to her. Aunt Lydia imposed a strict visiting schedule, allowing me only 2 hours on Sunday afternoons, claiming it was to not tire Mother out. When I arrived during these hours, a cousin or Aunt Lydia would almost always drop in, making any kind of personal, heartfelt conversation impossible, and in return, I found creative ways to keep in touch. I would bring lunch to share with Grandma on my days off, slipping into the house when the relatives were away. The nurse Marina, a kind woman who sincerely cared for my grandmother, became my secret ally. Sometimes she would call me directly, whispering, "Come, Aglaia, Elizaveta Matveyevna is having a good day today," she would ask. On the last New Year before her death, I was not invited to the family celebration at all. I received a short, cold text message from Aunt Lydia. "This year we are celebrating in a very small circle. Mother needs absolute peace." Later, I learned from Marina that a small circle meant everyone except me. So on the eve of the holiday, I quietly approached the familiar door, not daring to ring the bell, and left Marina a package. My grandmother's favorite Tula gingerbread, a soft cashmere shawl in her favorite blue color, and a photo album with pictures of her dacha on a Volga over the decades. When my grandmother passed away in April, I didn't learn about it from my family. Marina called me in tears from my grandmother's apartment. By the time I arrived, Uncle Pavel and Aunt Lydia were already there, busily discussing the details with the funeral director. "Oh, Aglaia," Aunt Lydia said with feigned icy sweetness when she saw me. "We were going to call you, of course." The funeral turned into a parade of hypocrisy and family politics. I was seated in the third row, behind distant relatives who had seen Grandma maybe twice in the last 10 years. I wasn't asked to give a speech. Uncle Pavel gave a long eulogy that focused on my grandmother's late husband's business acumen and the material legacy he left the family. He talked about numbers, assets, and status, but he didn't mention her love of poetry, her sharp mind, or how she baked the best gingerbread in the world. All the while, I sat there, clenching my fists, thinking about my grandmother's words, about how she would fix everything, not understanding how that was possible now. 2 weeks after the funeral, as I was preparing dinner in my small apartment, my phone beeped with a new message. It was from my cousin Raisa, and the message had clearly been sent by mistake to the general chat. "Tomorrow at 2:00 p.m. at Arseniev's office." Mom says, Aglaia doesn't say. I stared at the screen, rereading the short phrase over and over again. A chill began to slowly rise from my stomach to my throat. Seconds later came another, panicked, "Sorry, wrong chat, please ignore." But it was too late. I sat down at the kitchen table, feeling the ground slipping out from under my feet. So that was it. They weren't even going to tell me about the reading of the will. Whatever inheritance my grandmother left me, they planned to keep me in complete ignorance, and I stayed up all night, torn between the desire to rise above their pettiness and my sense of duty to my grandmother. I never chased her money. Our relationship was based on love, not on the expectation of an inheritance. But something stronger inside told me that Elizaveta Matveyevna would have wanted me to be present. I deserved to hear her last will, even if she didn't leave me a penny. By morning, I had made my decision. I asked for time off from work, which I almost never did, and carefully chose my outfit, a simple dark blue dress that my grandmother liked so much. I wanted to look respectful, not like someone desperate for money. As I drove to the law office on Tverskaya, my hands shook on the steering wheel. I rehearsed what I would say, how I would handle the inevitable confrontation. In the elevator of the old, solid building, I took a deep breath, almost hearing my grandmother's voice. "Stand up straight, Aglaya. You have the right to be where I wanted you to be." When the doors opened, I saw them right away. Uncle Pavel, Aunt Lydia, Raisa, and Rodion, even some distant relatives. Clustered in the waiting area, speaking in low voices, Aunt Lydia's face, who noticed me first, froze and then quickly took on an expression of extreme disapproval. "Aglaya!" she said loudly, causing everyone to turn around. "What are you doing here?" I lifted my chin slightly. I had come to read my grandmother's will. Uncle Pavel stepped forward, physically blocking my way. "You weren't invited. It's just for the family." "I am the family," I replied simply. "Do you know what he means?" Raisa interjected. "For a family that respected my grandmother's wishes rather than trying to influence her." Before I could answer, the office door opened, and an older man with gray hair and kind eyes appeared. "Is everyone here for the case of Elizaveta Matveyevna Orlova?" he asked, then noticed the tension. "Is there a problem?" Aunt Lydia stepped forward with her most charming smile. "Mr. Arseniev, there has been a misunderstanding. Aglaya was not supposed to be present at today's reading." The lawyer looked puzzled. "Aglaya Romanovna Orlova, granddaughter of Elizaveta Matveyevna?" "Yes, that's me," I confirmed. He checked his papers. "Then you should definitely be here." "Please, everyone, come in." In the conference room, I sat by the door, feeling everyone's eyes on me. The whispers were barely hidden. "How did she know?" Pavel would be furious. Mr. Arseniev cleared his throat, calling for order. "Before we begin, I must mention that I was not only Elizaveta Matveyevna's lawyer for over 30 years, but also her friend. She was very specific in her wishes, and I intend to fulfill them exactly." He reached for the folder, but Aunt Lydia interrupted him. "Mr. Arseniev, I think I should explain the situation with Aglaya. We didn't invite her because we've already discussed the distribution of most of the things." "We didn't want to waste your time." I felt my face heat up. "We've already divided everything up," my aunt announced with finality. "There was a reason you weren't invited." Mr. Arseniev frowned, looking genuinely puzzled. "I'm afraid there's been a serious misunderstanding, Lydia Ivanovna." Nothing was to be distributed. He looked straight at me. "And as for Mrs. Aglaya Orlova not being invited," he opened the folder and adjusted his glasses, which would be extremely strange, given the contents of the will. "What do you mean?" Uncle Pavel demanded. Mr. Arseniev looked up, his expression professionally neutral, but there was a glimmer of something like satisfaction in his eyes. "I mean that her name is the only one in the will." A dead silence reigned in the room. It was as if the air had been sucked out, and no one dared breathe. "It's impossible," Uncle Pavel finally hissed. "There must be some mistake." "I assure you, there is no mistake," replied Mr. Arseniev in the tone of a man who makes no mistakes. "Perhaps it would be better if I simply read Elizaveta Matveyevna's will, as she wished." He put on his reading glasses and began in a clear, even voice. "I, Orlova Elizaveta Matveyevna, being of sound mind and memory, hereby declare that this is my last will and testament. After much thought and observation of my family in recent years, I have come to a decision regarding the distribution of my property." I bequeath all my property, both movable and immovable, including but not limited to my apartment at the address on Arbet, my dacha in the Plyos area, all financial accounts, investments, and personal belongings to my granddaughter, Aglaia Romanovna Orlova. There was a collective sigh. Raisa dropped a glass of water, which shattered across the parquet floor. "This is illegal," said Uncle Pavel, his face turning crimson. "We will dispute it. She was not in her right mind," Lydia shouted. Mr. Arseniev shook his head. "I would not advise it." Elizaveta Matveyevna had foreseen such a reaction and had taken exhaustive measures. She had undergone a comprehensive cognitive evaluation by 3 independent neurologists in the months before her death. All of them confirmed that she was fully competent to make these decisions. Then Mr. Arseniev produced a sealed envelope. "Aglaia, your grandmother asked me to give you this letter. With trembling hands, I opened it. 'My dear Aglaia,' wrote my grandmother. 'If you're reading this, it means I'm gone, and you just found out you're my sole heir. I can imagine how the family took it. I've been watching them for years.' Pavel came only to discuss my assets. Lydia brought expensive gifts, but never stayed for a real conversation. The grandchildren, except for you, called only on holidays. But you, Aglaia, you came because you wanted to be with me. You listened to my stories, baked according to my recipes, and treated me like a person, not a bank account. I have been testing for the last few years. You are the only one who never failed it, with love and full confidence in you, Grandma Elizaveta." I looked up from the letter, tears streaming down my cheeks, and saw that the room had plunged into the chaos of POK. I looked at them through my tears. Mr. Arseniev raised his voice, breaking through the noise. "There is something else you all should know. Elizaveta Matveyevna documented everything." He opened another folder. "She kept meticulous records of visits, conversations, and behavior. 2 years ago, she installed a security system in the apartment that tracked who came and went. She saved text messages and emails. She even recorded some conversations, which is legal if one of the parties gives consent. Moreover, Elizaveta Matveyevna knew that things were taken from her house without permission. She has a complete catalog with photographs of all her property." "That's funny," Aunt Lydia snorted, but there was no longer the same confidence in her voice. "Really?" Mr. Arseniev raised an eyebrow. "Then perhaps you could explain why the antique bronze lamp of Tula manufacture from the study is now in your living room, or why Elizaveta Matveyevna's diamond bracelet was on Raisa at the charity event last month, or why the watercolors of the Volga views from the dacha were photographed in Pavel Romanovich's study." The color drained from their faces. "There is a condition in the will," the lawyer continued, "that any items removed from Elizaveta Matveyevna's property must be returned within 30 days. Failure to do so will result in a lawsuit." Uncle Pavel finally exploded. "This is all your fault," he shouted at me, pointing a shaking finger. "You manipulated a confused old woman. You turned her against her own family." I thought of the countless evenings spent with my grandmother talking about books, of her joy when I brought her favorite ice cream for no reason at all. "No, Uncle Pavel," I said quietly. "Grandma knew exactly what she was doing. She always knew everything. The next weeks were a nightmare." The last words my uncle threw at me in that office were, "This is not the end," and he did not lie. The very next morning my phone started ringing off the hook before dawn. First Aunt Lydia, then Raisa, then relatives I barely knew, all demanding, blaming, or trying to negotiate things they felt they were entitled to. I stopped answering unfamiliar numbers, but my voicemail filled with threats and pleas. "Aglaia, this is Aunt Lydia. I expect you to do the right thing. Your grandmother was not herself, we all know that. Call me back immediately." "Hi, it's Rodion. Look, I know we weren't close, but that silver service was promised to me many years ago. I can forward you a letter where Grandma mentions it." By the end of the week, the harassment had moved online. Raisa posted a thinly veiled message on a social network. It's amazing how some people can pretend to care about their family just to get what they want. The true face always comes out. I changed my phone number and closed my social media accounts. But the stress took its toll on my physical condition. I barely slept and suffered from headaches, and my boss at the hospice noticed that I was making small mistakes. She insisted that I take a week off. That week, I finally went to my grandmother's house, now my home. I walked into the quiet, empty rooms that still smelled of her perfume, and I felt something was wrong. The house felt empty. There were glaring gaps on the walls and shelves. As I walked from room to room, the scale of what had happened began to sink in. The antique clock that always stood in the hallway was gone. Several pieces were missing from the collection of Gusev crystal figurines that Grandma treasured so much. Her jewelry box in the bedroom was almost empty. They had taken not only valuables, but also an item of purely sentimental value, an old Ehrenberg Downy shawl knitted by her mother, and a collection of souvenir spoons from her travels with Grandpa. I sank down on her bed, the handmade quilt stripped from it, and cried until there were no more tears. It wasn't about the money. It was about the erasure of her presence and the theft of memories I'd hoped to preserve. Deep in her closet, I found a small safe I didn't know about. After trying several dates that were significant to her, I finally typed in her birthday and it opened. Inside was a leather journal, several USB drives, and a note in her handwriting. For Aglaia, use when needed. The diary described everything in detail, every visit, every conversation, every borrowed and unreturned item. She documented the family's behavior for years, creating an irrefutable archive. The USB drives contained copies of emails, photos of her belongings, and even audio recordings. One recording, made 6 months before her death, stood out. Pavel stopped by today and spent an hour trying to convince me to sell the dacha. When I refused, he said I was being irrational about a depreciating asset. What he doesn't know is that I ordered an appraisal of the plot last month. It was worth almost twice as much as when Harold and I bought it. Pavel had never understood the difference between price and value. Another entry was even more revealing. Lydia arrived with Raisa. While Lydia distracted me in the living room, Raisa disappeared upstairs for almost 20 minutes. After they left, I checked my jewelry box. As I suspected, my diamond bracelet was now missing. I updated the catalog and took a photo of the empty space. I wondered if they realized there were cameras in the upstairs hallway now. Armed with this evidence, I contacted Mr. Arseniev again. I had to fight back. I told him they had taken so much already. Elizaveta Matveyevna suspected that this could happen. He answered seriously. I will connect you with a litigation lawyer, Zoya Denisova. She specializes in challenging wills and theft of inheritance. Zoya Denisova, the lawyer Mr. Arseniev recommended to me, was a formidable woman in her 50s with a reputation as a ruthless predator. After reviewing my grandmother's paperwork, she leaned back in her chair with the first genuine smile I had ever seen. Your grandmother didn't just put together a case, she said. She built a fortress. It's one of the most well-documented cases I've ever seen. With this new evidence, we developed a strategy. First, we filed an official list of all missing property with the court, with photographs and documentation of their current location. Then we sent out formal legal demands for the return of each item with a clear deadline. At the same time, Zoya filed a motion to dismiss Uncle Pavel's claim, attaching Grandma's videos as evidence. No judge would rule against your grandmother after seeing this, she assured me. We also received testimony from Marina and the other nurses who had cared for Grandma. Marina provided a detailed calendar of all visitors, showing that over the past year I had visited Grandma 64 times, while Uncle Pavel had visited 7 times and Aunt Lydia had visited 9. Armed with this mountain of evidence, Zoya suggested calling a family meeting in her office. On the day of the meeting, they showed up one after another, Uncle Pavel with his nervous lawyer, Aunt Lydia, who avoided my gaze, Raisa and Rodion, who tried to look bored. Thank you for coming, Zoya began. We asked for this meeting to resolve some issues concerning Elizaveta Matveyevna's inheritance. Uncle Pavel's lawyer immediately began reading a prepared statement of serious concerns about undue influence. Zoya let him finish before pressing a button on the remote. Grandma's face appeared on the large screen on the wall. My name is Orlova Elizaveta Matveyevna." Her clear voice filled the room. "Today, September 15, I am writing this down of my own free will, being in full mental capacity." As the video played, I watched my family's faces. Uncle Pavel grew paler. Aunt Lydia pressed her hand to her mouth. Raisa began to cry silently. When the recording ended, Zoya simply said, "There are 17 more videos like this." She changed the image on the screen to a spreadsheet. "This is the current list of items removed from Elizaveta Matveyevna's property without permission. The total amount at the moment is slightly more than 40 million rubles. Ms. Orlova is ready to file a police report for theft if these items are not returned within 7 days." Zoya continued in her businesslike tone. "In addition, we have documentation of financial exploitation that may be of interest to the prosecutor's office." 2 days later, Uncle Pavel's lawyer called Zoya to say that they were withdrawing their lawsuit. Within a week, things began appearing on the porch of Grandma's house, delivered by shipping companies. No notes, no apologies. I hadn't expected to hear anything from them, so I was surprised when Aunt Lydia called. "Aglaya," she said, her voice lacking its usual harshness. We didn't realize how much these last years meant to Mother." "You never asked," I simply replied. There was a long pause. The next day, I called each family member and asked them to choose one sentimental item to remember Grandma by. Raisa, to my surprise, asked for a recipe book. "She once taught me how to bake pechushki," she admitted. "It's one of my few good memories of her." Rodion asked for his grandfather's old box for willow tackle from the dacha. Uncle Pavel predictably refused, but Aunt Lydia asked for one of Grandma's watercolors. A simple landscape with a view of the Volga at sunset. These small gestures did not heal the deep wounds, but they were a start. 6 months later, I was sitting in my grandmother's garden, now my garden. In her desk, I found another envelope for Aglaya after everything had settled down. "My dear," she wrote, "if you are reading this, the storm has passed. This inheritance was never meant to be a punishment to others, but an acknowledgement of your heart. Use it to become an even more authentic version of yourself. Don't let this money change you, but let us give you freedom. And maybe when the wounds heal, find a way to include your family in your life again, not because they deserve it, but because connection matters." The following week, I began to put her advice into practice. I established a scholarship named after Elizaveta Matveyevna at my medical school for students interested in popular care, and began work on a foundation to support lonely seniors. The family's healing occurred in small, unexpected moments. Raisa was the first to make contact, asking to meet for coffee. She showed off photos of her newborn daughter, whom she named Elizabeth. "I want her to know the real family stories," she explained awkwardly, "not just the glossy versions we tell." Will you ever share your memories with her?" Uncle Pavel never made peace, and some wounds are too deep. I accepted this reality by leaving the door open. A year after my grandmother died, I held a memorial dinner at her house. I invited only those who truly loved her, Marina, Mr. Arseniev, a few neighbors, and even Raisa and little Lisa. We shared stories, laughed, and cried a little, creating the kind of atmosphere that Grandma would have loved. When the guests left, I stood on the porch, watching the fireflies in the summer twilight. The inheritance cost me part of my family, but it gave me something far more valuable, the freedom to live by my own values, as my grandmother taught me. I realized that this was her true testament, not a house or money, but the courage to stand firm in my truth. "We did it, Grandma," I whispered. "We fixed it.